Sir Robert Broke SL was a British justice, politician and legal writer. Although a landowner in rural Shropshire, he made his fortune through more than 20 years' service to the City of London.MP for the city in 5 parliaments. He served as Speaker of the House of Commons in 1554. He is celebrated as the author of one of the Books of Authority. A prominent religious conservative, he founded a notable recusant dynasty. His surname is also rendered Brooke, and occasionally Brooke, which are, for modern readers, better indicators of pronunciation. Early life and education. Robert Broke was born by 1515. His known Oxford admission date suggests the first decade of the century. He was the eldest son of Thomas Broke of Claverley in Shropshire, Margaret Grosvenor, daughter of Humphrey Grosvenor of Farmcote, a hamlet to the southeast of Claverley. Most of early 16th century Shropshire was poor and underdeveloped sheep country, ruled by the Council of Wales and the Marches. Claverley was a large parish, dominated by the Gatacre family, whose seat was at its southern edge. Broke was admitted to study for a BA at Oxford University in 1521. As a very minor member of the landed gentry, Broke needed to seek sources of income outside his own locality if he were to prosper, and he did so through London and the law. He studied at Strand Inn, and from there was admitted to Middle Temple at some point between 1525 and 1528. He studied pleading with John Genore, a famous prothonotary who influenced a whole generation of judges and jurists. Judicial career. Broke enjoyed considerable power as an official of the City of London before attaining high office in the last 4 years of his life. He was also the author of several important works on the law. Officers held. Broke's judicial career began in 1536 when he was appointed Common Sergeant of London on the recommendation of Henry VIII and the Queen, Jane Seymour. How he gained such royal favour is unknown. As sergeant, Broke attended court with the Lord Mayor of London, as well as the Court of Aldermen and the Court of Common Council, the city's main deliberative body. One of his tasks was to review, rewrite and put forward parliamentary bills proposed by the city. In 1540, Broke identified and returned a volume of the letter books of the City of London that had been lost for some time. In January 1544 he was directed to intervene in the passage of 2 bills, one from the secondaries of the Compter, aiming to repeal the Act against untrue verdicts, another already put to the House that intended to prevent merchants buying steel and other goods, which Broke was told to forestall. In 1545 it was a bill to bring urban sanctuaries under the control of borough and city authorities. Among the legal offices, the Common Sergeant was second only to the Recorder of London. When this post became vacant in 1545, a letter from the King to the Aldermen once again proved decisive in securing it for Broke, and he took office on the 12th of November. On the 17th of November he was elected to Parliament in place of his predecessor as Recorder, Sir Roger Cholmondeley. On the 19th of November he was granted freedom of the City of London, a status tied to his membership of the Worshipful Company of Mercers, the first in order of precedence of London's livery companies. Holding these public offices did not prevent Broke pursuing private practice, and his signature is found on bills in Chancery in the 1530s and 1540s. During this time he was also Deputy Chief Steward for the Duchy of Lancaster, and was created a Sergeant at Law in 1552. On the 8th of October 1554 he was appointed Chief Justice of the Common Pleas, probably a reward from Queen Mary for his performance as Speaker of the House of Commons. He was knighted on the 27th of January 1555 by King Philip. On the 26th of February he presided over the trial of Charles Staunton, 8th Baron Staunton, accused of murdering two men, William Hart Gill and his son John. Staunton refused to plead and Broke threatened him with the punishment of being pressed to death. He then entered a plea of guilty and was executed on the 16th of March. Broke fell into conflict with the court's Queen Justices when he appointed Thomas Gatacre, his wife's brother, as chief prothonotary in 1557. The justices rejected him, and Broke's second choice, William Wetterly, was then allowed to take office despite judicial preference for another candidate. Works in 1542. Broke became a bencher at the Middle Temple. As autumn reader that year, his subject was the 1540 Statute of Limitations. The readings circulated in manuscript and were subsequently printed in 1547. As Lent Reader in 1551, his subject was Pleas of the Crown, using Chapter 18 of Magna Carta as the source. This also circulated in manuscript before being published in 1641, almost 100 years after his death. Broke's most important work was Le Grand Abridgment, a classified compendium of law as it then prevailed, modelled on a work of the same name by Anthony Fitzherbert, with which it is sometimes confused. It closely reflected Broke's own interests and experience. A section is given over to the subject of London. Great stress is placed on the role of Parliament, and it contains numerous cases in which Broke appeared. The book was not published until 1568, a decade after Broke's death, and was in law French. But it was an immediate success and came to be regarded as one of the books of authority which courts can use as evidence of the law prevailing at the time. From it Richard Bellew extracted important cases decided during the reigns of Henry VIII, Edward VI and Mary I, and issued them as a separate compilation, soon rendered into English, and often cited as Broke's new cases. This proved even more popular than the book from which it was extracted. Political career. Broke served as a Member of Parliament for the City of London from 1545 until 1554, serving as Speaker of the House of Commons of England in 1554. Broke was elected to the Parliament of 1545, the last of Henry VIII's reign, as a replacement for Sir Roger Cholmondeley. The Parliament had been called as long ago as December 1544, and Cholmondeley was elected to Parliament on the 19th of January 1545. However, the opening of Parliament was delayed until the 23rd of November, and Cholmondeley was appointed an Exchequer Baron in the meantime, and so forced to relinquish both his post as Recorder and his parliamentary seat. London had 4 MPs. 2, called Knights, were elected by the Aldermen, and one of these was always the Recorder. The other 2, called Burgesses, were elected by the Court of Common Council from a list of 12 proposed by the Aldermen. The Recorder always resigned his seat when he left office, hence Broke's election was automatic. London was second only to the Crown as sponsor of legislation, and solid legal acumen was in need at all times among its delegation to the House of Commons. Broke's colleagues in the 1545 Parliament were Sir Richard Gresham, a former Lord Mayor, John Sturgeon, a staunch Protestant, and Paul Withypearl, a wealthy merchant with interests in the Netherlands, Spain and Crete. Much of the work involved defending the city against the claims of its clergy. They were unsuccessful in getting the bill on sanctuaries through the House, but they were able to force a compromise over a bill intended to tighten up tithe collection from the citizens. Such manoeuvring was typical of the concerns of London members in the Tudor period. Parliament of 1547. The first Parliament of Edward VI lasted for most of the reign, and Broke was automatically returned to it. His aldermanic colleague was the goldsmith Sir Martin Bowes, who had just served his term as Lord Mayor, having made so large a fortune at the Royal Mint that he was able easily to afford the £10,000 to settle accounts when he and the other masters were found to have systematically debased the coinage. Bowes remained a London MP throughout Brook's term, apart from a short break in 1553. The first session of the Parliament definitively abolished chantries, a major concern of the London members in the second and subsequent sessions of the Parliament was to ensure that the city did not lose control of the wealth of the chantries within its boundaries to the King. Broke, who had been appointed Commissioner for Chantries in London, Westminster and Middlesex in 1546, during an earlier and abortive move toward abolition, must have had first-hand knowledge of the subject. The London members also wrestled with an act to release fee farms for 3 years to ensure that London got the best terms from it. Broke was told to work closely with one of the burgesses who had specialist knowledge of the subject. The other burgess, Thomas Curtis, was elected an alderman in 1551, a move which he resisted to the point of imprisonment and which forced him to resign his seat in Parliament. In 1552 Broke was sent to lobby for further assurances from the Crown about lands recently purchased by the city. Broke was not limited to purely metropolitan concerns. As a skilled lawyer and draftsman, his talents were useful to the Crown and its ministers, and he was called upon by others if they thought his skills could benefit their cause. In 1549, he was given responsibility for a bill for preaching diverse opinions. The third session of the Parliament passed an act to reform canon law, and Broke was appointed to the commission set up for this purpose on 12 February 1552. In March 1552, he was one of those deputed to the redraft the Treason Act 1551 to make it illegal to say that the king is an heretic, schismatic infidel, a usurper of the crown. Quote, he was one of those enlisted in 1549 by the supporters of Henry Clifford, 2nd Earl of Cumberland, whose family had long held the shrievalty of Westmoreland by hereditary right. The supporters of his neighbour Thomas Wharton, 1st Baron Wharton, were proposing to end the arrangement. He was also called in by John de Vere, 16th Earl of Oxford, in 1552 to advise on legislation he was promoting to free himself of commitments made to Edward Seymour, 1st Duke of Somerset, the disgraced and executed former Lord Protector. Broke and Bowes were sent to the last Parliament of Edward VI's reign, along with 2 burgesses, Curtis's replacement, John Blundell and John Marsh, both Protestants and particularly long-serving MPs. The Parliament met as the succession question loomed large and lasted for only the month of March 1553. However, the London delegation were initially more concerned with the campaign to get the use of fuel in London better regulated, in which they succeeded, through the passage of an act. However, Broke was soon given the question of the Maidstone election to investigate, and this was perhaps a result of the succession crisis. The town had been granted a charter of incorporation in 1549. An election was called as soon as the Parliament was summoned, but there was no reference to parliamentary representation in the charter. Broke was joined in his work by Richard Morgan, a fellow judge and MP for Gloucester, as well as a fellow Catholic. They were enjoined by Parliament to peruse the Charter of Maidstone, whether they may have burgesses in this house, and in the meantime the burgesses that are to be absent out of this house till it be fully ordered. Quote, it was possible that supporters of John Dudley, 1st Duke of Northumberland, had used Maidstone's ambiguous status as a way of increasing parliamentary support for Lady Jane Grey's succession. as the town was in the Protestant heartland of Kent. In fact, the lord of the manor was Thomas Wyatt. The High Sheriff of Kent who made the return was Sir John Guilford, a cousin of Dudley's wife, and one of the burgesses elected was a relative of both Dudley and Jane Grey. It is unclear what Broke and Morgan reported, or even if they delivered the report, but Maidstone was disfranchised and did not regain the right to parliamentary representation until it was granted by a new charter 1559. Parliaments of Mary I. For the Parliament of October 1553, Bowes was temporarily replaced by Sir Rowland Hill, a former Lord Mayor and a Protestant, making Broke the only Catholic MP from London. Despite this, and the momentous events of the summer, in which Dudley attempted to place Jane Grey on the throne and was defeated by a rebellion in favour of Mary, Edward's Catholic elder sister, the London delegation attended the Parliament with an entirely commercial agenda. They toiled away at legislation to regulate London's physicians, chandlers in both wax and tallow, leather tanners and bowling alleys, as well as a measure to deregulate the sale of wine. However, the Crown took initial steps to undo the Edwardian Reformation. One of the key measures protecting it was the Treason Act, which Broke had helped to redraft. After a bill to repeal it had passed its second reading, it was given to Broke to review and steer through its final stages. The Parliament of April 1554 had a much stronger commission to further the Marian Counter-Reformation, for corroboration of true religion, and touching the Queen's Highness' most noble marriage to Philip II of Spain. Broke attended with Bowes, Blundell and Marsh. At the Assembly of the Parliament, Broke was elected Speaker, probably with royal support. The Parliament was dissolved after only a month. The Speaker's main task was to steer through a bill, dear to many members, to protect those who had profited from the dissolution of the monasteries from ecclesiastical censure. This he did competently, although the bill was defeated in the House of Lords. The main measures proposed by the Crown, most importantly those relating to the Queen's marriage, were carried expeditiously. Broke's conduct as Speaker seems to have been the main factor influencing the Queen to open up opportunities within the judiciary. He was appointed Chief Justice of Common Pleas after the summoning of the next Parliament, but before it assembled. This forced him to resign the recordership, and thus his common seat. Landowner. Broke's family had been decidedly minor landowners in and around Clavely. However, his career gave him the contacts and wealth to expand his holdings greatly. He was able to purchase land and rights expropriated through the dissolution of the monasteries in the reign of Henry VIII and the abolition of chantries and colleges in the reign of Edward VI. Most important for Broke's family was the acquisition of the manor of Madeley, Shropshire, which had been the closest domain estate of Wenlock Priory. After passing back to the Crown in 1540 on the dissolution of the Priory, it was purchased by Broke in 1544 and held as half a knight's fee. For 2 centuries Madeley was to be the seat of the Broke family, famous and notorious for the royalist plotting during the Civil War and Commonwealth. In the same year, Broke also bought the advowson of the parish church, and in 1549 the property of St. Mary's Guild, a lay fraternity that had tended the Lady Chapel. He even purchased the pension that the rector of Badger, Shropshire, had paid to Wenlock. Madeley's mineral wealth was already partly apparent. There had been coal mining since the 14th century, and there was already an iron ore working rented out when Broke bought the manor. It was to prove one of the focal points of England's industrial revolution. In 1548 Broke bought the manor of Lapley from Sir Richard Manners, formerly the domain estate of Lapley Priory. This had been granted by Henry V to the College of St. Bartholomew, Tong, Shropshire, which was the shrine church of the Vernon family of Haddon Hall. manors acquired it at the abolition of colleges and chantries, and was now in a position to sell this former church property for ready cash. Brooke settled laply on his second wife, Dorothy Gatacre, at the marriage, and she obtained it on his death. Brooke's family resided generally in Shropshire. He visited Shropshire periodically to meet family and friends, but most of the time lived in one of his London houses, at Carter Lane or in Putney. Religious beliefs. Opinions on Brooke's religious beliefs differ only in degree. The History of Parliament says, "There seems no doubt that Brooke was a Catholic." The 1904 Dictionary of National Biography volume quotes, without attribution, the description, "zealous Catholic," while the Victoria County History on his main manor echoes with the more disparaging, "zealous Papist." Quote, in 1548, it was reported that Brooke and Clement Smith, MP for Malden, smiled and laughed when they heard the priest at St. Gregory's by Paul's at his prayers at Mass pray God to send the council grace to turn from their erroneous opinions that they were in, although the allegation was later withdrawn. Brooke's religious conservatism was a persistent theme of his life. He had served as Commissioner for Heresies for London in 1541, when Henry VIII's final persecution of Protestants was launched. The commission to Edmund Bonner, the Bishop of London, is faithfully preserved in Fox's Book of Martyrs, with a list of the names of those whose oaths were to be taken, including notably Brooke himself, Cholmondeley and Gresham. However, in common with the Shropshire and Staffordshire gentry circle in which he moved, Brooke showed no great sympathy for the power and wealth of the clergy. He worked to limit the power of the London clergy and later readily accepted lands expropriated from monasteries and chantries, using his power as Speaker to attempt to secure the purchasers. Brooke's attitude was generally strictly professional. He was willing to use his legal skills on behalf of employers or clients, irrespective of the religious inclinations or intentions, so it is never entirely safe to read his beliefs from his actions. Hence he worked on both the passage and the repeal of the 1551 Treason Act, which specifically forbade religious criticism of Edward VI. It was never likely that he would appear on the October 1553 Crown Office list of MPs as one of those which stood for the true religion, in this case, Protestant. Only 60 names are marked, although they include 2 colleagues, Blundell and Marsh. Brooke married within his own Catholic regional circle. The Gatacres were to become mainly recusants, as were his own descendants. Death. Brooke's Inquisition post-mortem records that he died on the 5th of September 1558 at Patsill Hall. However, his tomb inscription says that he died on the 6th of September, while visiting his friends and country. The discrepancy is small, and it is possible he died in the night, with the precise moment unknown. He was buried in Claverley Church. His chest tomb bears his effigy, clad in his gown of office, lying between his 2 wives, with his children in miniature around the sides. It is by far the finest tomb in the church. The Brooke tomb in All Saints Church, Claverley. Brooke's will was dated the 7th of January 1558. The executors of the will included Humphrey Moseley, a young lawyer and MP who was a close friend of Brooke. The overseers were William Gatacre, his father-in-law, John and Richard Brooke, his eldest son by each marriage, and Richard Horwood, his clerk and cousin. Horwood very briefly took wardship of John as he reached his 21st birthday in June 1559. The estates were divided between John and Richard, although the widow, Dorothy, had laply and retained Madeley until her death. The other sons were given £40 each, with the proviso that they take up study a trade to earn a living, meet for a gentleman's son. Family. Brooke married twice, and his will shows that he had 17 children in all. His wives were Anne Waring, daughter of Nicholas Waring of Shrewsbury, widow of Nicholas Hurlstone, a former MP for Rochester, who had died in 1531. Broke married Anne by 1537, and she gave birth to his eldest son John, his main heir, and at least 3 other children before dying. John Brooke inherited Brooke's most important estate, Madeley, although he did not obtain it until the death of Dorothy Gatacre, around 1572. He died in 1598. Basil Brooke, John's son and Robert's grandson, was a royalist conspirator, a noted wit and raconteur, and an important ironmaster. Partly through economic necessity resulting from his recusantcy, he sought to exploit the full industrial potential of the Madeley estate, establishing ironworks and even a steelworks at Coalbrookdale. Dorothy Gatacre, daughter of William Gatacre of Gatacre, near Claverley, Broke married Dorothy in 1544. She outlived Broke by about 14 years. They had at least 4 daughters and 5 sons, including Richard Brooke, who inherited part of Brooke's property as the eldest son of the marriage.